Welcome to the deep dive. Ready to explore some fascinating stuff.
Always.
Welcome to the deep dive. Ready to explore some fascinating stuff.
Always.
Today, we're diving into the world of global science, which honestly is always changing and pretty fascinating,
Absolutely.
You shared a chapter with us called The Globalization of Science, the increasing power of individual scientists.
Oh, yeah, that's a great one.
It's from the Oxford Handbook of Education and Globalization.
Right.
And get this, it was published online this year, so it's super up to date.
Very timely.
It uses data from 2000 to 2020 to track these major trends in science.
Yeah.
So we're going to uncover how individual scientists are really shaping the future of research
Yeah, that's really the core of it, isn't it?
in a world where knowledge doesn't really care about borders anymore.
Exactly. It's a whole new landscape. And what's so intriguing about this chapter is that it kind of challenges how we usually think about science.
Right.
We picture, I don't know, scientists in their labs, working in their own countries, but the reality is so much more interconnected and, I guess, complex.
Yeah. It's almost like these two worlds of science are kind of bumping into each other.
Yeah.
On the one hand, we have this global network of researchers collaborating across borders.
Right.
And on the other hand, they're still tied to their national systems, relying on their countries for funding.
It's a real balancing act for sure.
It is. So it's like they're part of this global team, but still tethered to their home countries.
Yeah, exactly. And that creates a real tension.
Yeah.
Think about it. Governments invest in science, right?
Right.
And they do it with the hope of seeing benefits for their own nation,
Yeah, of course.
like economic growth, maybe solutions to specific problems they're dealing with.
They're looking for a return on that investment.
Exactly. Precisely. But the whole rise of global science is kind of shaking things up a bit, isn't it?
Mhm. It's disrupting the status quo.
It is. This chapter, and also some work by researchers like Wagner, argue that this whole international collaboration thing, it's kind of starting to detach scientific research from those national goals.
So even though a government might fund a certain research project, thinking it will benefit their country, the results could actually end up benefiting the whole world.
Yeah.
Maybe even more than the country that funded it originally.
It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it? You
Right.
got it. And the way science is being organized plays a big role in all of this. It's becoming less about those national efforts
Yeah.
and more about a self-organizing network of scientists. They're choosing to work with each other based on, I guess, shared interests and goals that they have.
So it's more organic,
Oh.
more driven by the scientists themselves rather than a top-down approach from government.
Yeah, you got it. Exactly. And we can actually see this shift happening in the real world, too.
Oh, really?
Yeah. For instance, there's this study by Waltman and his colleagues,
Okay.
and they found that between 1980 and 2009, the average distance between researchers who were collaborating,
Okay.
it jumped from 334 kilometers to over 1,500 kilometers. That's a huge increase.
Wow. That's like going from working with someone in the same city to collaborating with someone on a whole other continent.
Exactly. It highlights how science is really transcending borders, isn't it?
It really does. So for everyone listening, what does all of this actually mean?
Well,
Why should you care about all these global shifts happening in science?
it's a good question. Well, for starters, it means that the most exciting research,
Right.
the groundbreaking stuff, it's increasingly coming out of these global collaborations, these partnerships.
So the really innovative stuff is happening when people work together across borders.
Yeah. And as this chapter really emphasizes, this shift is giving more power to individual scientists.
Interesting. So it's not just about the big institutions or governments anymore.
Right.
It's more about the individual researchers.
They're becoming key players in shaping the direction of global science.
That's a huge shift. So what's motivating all these scientists to collaborate across borders in the first place?
It's a good question.
Is it purely for the love of science, or is there something else going on?
Well, the pursuit of knowledge, that's definitely a huge motivator, of course.
Right.
But scientists are also increasingly acting as, well, what you might call free agents in this global landscape.
Free agents. Huh. I like that. So they're not just bound to what their home countries want them to do anymore.
Yeah, exactly. They're free to go after the best opportunities for their research, no matter where those opportunities might be.
They're free to pursue their passions, their interests.
Exactly. They're drawn to those collaborations that offer, I guess, the most promising rewards.
The ones that give them the best chance of success.
Yeah, things like boosting their reputation, accessing more resources, and, importantly, having the freedom to really pursue their own passions in their research.
So it's almost like a competitive marketplace in a way,
Yeah.
where scientists are kind of shopping around for the best collaborations, the ones that will give them an advantage.
It's a great way to put it, actually. Yeah. And to really understand this whole dynamic, it helps to think about, what sociologist Robert Merton described as the tournament structure of science.
The tournament structure.
Yeah, it's like this competition, basically.
Okay.
Where the top performers, they get the most recognition and resources,
So the most successful researchers get the most support.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah. It's kind of like a race to the top, in a way. But even if a scientist doesn't win,
Right.
they can still, they can gain valuable experience along the way.
Build connections.
Yeah, build connections, all those things that help them advance in their careers.
Makes sense. So it's not just about winning, it's about constantly learning and growing as a scientist.
Exactly. And this competitive landscape is being fueled by this explosion of data we have on scientific publications.
Oh, right. Like all the information about who's publishing what and who's collaborating with whom.
Exactly. It's like big data has hit the world of science, hasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
We can now track the impact of scientists with so much detail.
I remember reading a study by Ioannidis and his colleagues.
Yeah.
They found that, get this, the top 1% of scientists,
Yeah, tiny fracture.
they produce almost half, like 41.7% of all the published papers.
It's incredible, isn't it? It really highlights how concentrated research power is.
It does. But there's another side to this globalization of science that we have to talk about.
Right. There's always another side to the story.
There is, and it's about it's about these global inequalities.
Yeah, the fact that not all countries and researchers are benefiting equally from this globalized system.
So even though science is becoming more global, the playing field isn't necessarily level.
Sadly, that's the case. The chapter is very clear about that. While global science is open to anyone, there are big disparities.
In terms of who gets the most recognition.
Exactly. And who gets the most benefits from these international collaborations.
So where you're from, where you work, it can still have a big impact on your success as a scientist.
Unfortunately, yeah. And, research coming from certain countries, institutions, even certain fields, it tends to have more influence and impact.
And I imagine those inequalities create even more tension, between the global nature of science and the desire of individual nations to actually see a return on their investment.
Absolutely. It's a constant push and pull. And we're seeing that tension play out in so many ways, Welcome back to our deep dive and into the globalization of science.
Picking up right where we left off with that tension,
Right.
between globally collaborative science and nations wanting to, see some benefits from what they're putting in.
Yeah, it's like government funds this research into, I don't know, a new drug.
Okay.
And they're hoping it will, improve healthcare in their country.
Makes sense, yeah.
But then what happens? A global team makes this breakthrough using that very research.
Right.
And a company in another country, they end up developing and selling the drug.
So the original country, the one that paid for the research,
Yeah.
they basically end up benefiting another country more. Kind of a bummer.
That's the dilemma. And it's not just medicine, it's across all sorts of different fields.
It's a global phenomenon.
It is. It's a real challenge for those policymakers trying to,
Yeah.
balance supporting global science with making sure that their own nation benefits.
So how do they even begin to approach that? It can't be easy.
It's a tough one. It's definitely not a simple solution,
Right.
This chapter doesn't really give a clear-cut answer, I have to say.
Okay.
But it does highlight, the importance of understanding these global dynamics.
Yeah.
Policymakers can't just ignore the reality that science is, it's increasingly networked, it's global.
It's interconnected.
Exactly. And trying to, control the flow of knowledge too tightly,
Right.
it could actually backfire,
Okay.
stifle innovation.
So it's more about adapting, I guess, to this new landscape rather than trying to force those old models onto it.
Exactly. And a big part of that adaptation is recognizing, I think,
Yeah.
the influence of individual scientists
Okay.
in shaping this global research landscape.
Because at the end of the day, it's the scientists who are making those decisions about,
Yeah.
who they collaborate with, what they research, where they publish their findings.
Right.
They're the architects of this new scientific world.
That's a powerful way to put it. And speaking of powerful individuals, this chapter goes into,
Yeah.
some fascinating data about how concentrated research output is.
Right. We talked earlier about
Yeah,
the top 1% of scientists. I mean, they're producing almost half of all those published papers.
exactly. And when you look closer at those top performers,
Yeah.
you often find that they're concentrated, in specific countries,
Okay.
specific institutions, even certain fields of research.
So we're back to those inequalities again.
Yeah.
It's like almost a scientific elite emerging in a way.
Yeah, it raises questions about, access to resources, visibility, who
Yeah.
really gets to shape the future of scientific discovery.
Makes you wonder if, this globalization of science,
Yeah.
while it has so much potential,
Yeah.
it could also, be making existing inequalities worse.
It's a valid concern. Yeah, it's something we need to be mindful of as we navigate this evolving landscape.
So far, we've explored, this fascinating kind of push and pull
Yeah,
between global science and those national interests.
absolutely.
We've seen how individual scientists are,
Yeah.
kind of emerging as key players in this new world.
Right.
But there's another layer to this whole story that we need to unpack.
Okay.
How is globalization shaping, the very nature of scientific knowledge itself?
Ah, yes. That's where things get even more interesting.
Because it's not just about, scientists working together across borders. It's about how this global interconnectedness is influencing, I don't know, the questions that
Yeah.
they're asking, the methods that they're using,
Yeah.
even the way they interpret data.
Precisely. And one of the key trends highlighted in the chapter is, it's the growing importance of what we call interdisciplinarity in global science.
So breaking down those walls, those traditional walls
Yeah.
between different fields of study, I don't know, a physicist working with a biologist and they're working with a sociologist,
Yeah.
all in the same project.
Exactly. When you bring, researchers from these different backgrounds together, they each bring those unique perspectives,
Yeah.
methods, ways of thinking about problems.
So instead of everyone just working in their own little silos, you get this, I don't know, this cross-pollination of ideas
Yeah.
that can lead to some, interesting breakthroughs.
That's a great way to put it. And this interdisciplinarity, it's often driven by, those very international collaborations that we've been talking about. Researchers from different countries, they're more likely to, bring those diverse disciplinary perspectives to the table.
It's like adding different spices to a dish.
Yeah.
You create a whole new flavor profile, right?
Right.
You get something more complex and interesting than if you just had, I don't know, one ingredient.
That's a great analogy. And this mixing of disciplines, it can also challenge, those long-held assumptions within certain fields.
Right, because you're getting these outside perspectives.
Yeah. Globalization, it acts as a kind of intellectual shakeup,
Okay.
forcing those researchers to rethink their approaches and consider new ways of seeing things.
Kind of like traveling to a new country and experiencing a different culture.
Right.
It broadens your perspective, makes you question things that you might have taken for granted.
Exactly. And all of this intellectual kind of ferment, I guess,
Okay.
can lead to new research questions, innovative methodologies,
Right.
even entirely new fields of study emerging at the intersections of those existing ones.
So we've got interdisciplinarity kind of brewing. What other ways is globalization, I don't know, influencing the kind of scientific knowledge that we produce?
Well, the chapter also highlights the growing importance of data sharing
Okay.
and open science in this increasingly globalized world.
Because scientific knowledge shouldn't be, locked away in some vault.
Right.
It's about, making it accessible, building upon each other's work.
Precisely. And this open science movement, it's gaining momentum as researchers, recognize the value of transparency
Right.
and collaboration in driving scientific progress.
But I imagine there are challenges with that too, right?
Of course.
I don't know, protecting intellectual property,
Yeah.
ensuring data privacy.
Absolutely. Those are real concerns that need to be addressed,
Okay.
But the potential benefits of open science, I mean, they're huge.
Yeah.
Imagine a world where researchers from, I don't know, every corner of the globe
Right.
can easily access and build upon each other's data, accelerating those discoveries and, leading to breakthroughs that benefit all of humanity.
It's like instead of everyone working on, I don't know, their own little puzzle,
Yeah.
they're all collaborating to piece together this giant global jigsaw puzzle of scientific knowledge.
I love that image. It really captures, the essence of what global science is all about. Not just working together,
Right.
but creating something truly greater than the sum of its parts.
So as we kind of wrap up part 2 of this deep dive, what's the key takeaway? Yeah, what should our listeners be thinking about?
Well, I think this chapter makes a compelling case, for embracing this globalization of science, not just as something that's just happening,
Right.
but as an incredible opportunity.
An opportunity to like tap into this global network of, brilliant minds.
Yeah.
To break down those disciplinary barriers to, really accelerate the pace of discovery.
For the benefit of all humankind.
Exactly. And it also highlights, I think, the responsibility that individual scientists have in shaping this global research landscape, making sure that science, remains a force for good in the world.
Absolutely.
Right? Because it's those individual choices, those collaborations, those research questions that will, determine the course of scientific progress in this interconnected world.
So as you continue on your journey through the world of global science, stay curious, embrace those collaborations, and never stop questioning those boundaries of what's possible.
And join us for that final part of this deep dive, where we'll explore, some specific examples of how globalization is shaping scientific knowledge and discuss what it all means for the future of, scientific discovery. Welcome back to the deep dive. We're in the final stretch of our exploration into the globalization of science. And wow, we've uncovered some really fascinating stuff, haven't we?
We have. It's been quite a journey.
It has. We talked about that tension between global collaboration and national interests and how scientists are really becoming these like power players in this new world of research.
Yeah, they're really driving the bus in a lot of ways.
They are. But let's get to like the heart of it all. How is globalization actually changing the kind of knowledge that science is producing? How is it changing the discoveries themselves?
That's the big question, isn't it? It's not just about who's doing the research or where they're doing it.
Right.
Globalization is actually like impacting the essence of scientific inquiry itself, the questions we ask, the methods, even how we interpret data.
So it's like globalization isn't just changing the players, it's changing the whole game of science.
That's a great way to put it. It's like rewriting the rules.
Yeah. And one of the most interesting things that the chapter highlights is this growing importance of what's called interdisciplinarity.
Oh, yeah. That's a big one.
What exactly does that mean, when we're talking about global science? Break it down for me.
Well, it basically means that those boundaries between traditional fields of science, they're getting blurrier and blurrier.
They're kind of breaking down.
Yeah, exactly. Think about it this way. You could have a project that brings together, physicists, biologists, sociologists, maybe even computer scientists, all working on the same team.
So instead of everyone being in their own separate departments, they're combining their knowledge and their perspectives to tackle a problem from all sides.
Precisely. And that's one of the things that global collaboration makes so much easier,
Okay.
When you have researchers from different countries, different backgrounds coming together, they just naturally bring all these different disciplinary lenses to the table.
It's like that old saying, 2 heads are better than one.
Right.
But amped up to a global scale.
Exactly. And this whole interdisciplinary approach, it leads to all sorts of really cool benefits.
Like what?
Well, for one, it can lead to really innovative solutions to complex problems.
Okay.
Think about climate change research.
Which one? Yeah.
You need physicists to understand the atmosphere. You need chemists to analyze pollutants, biologists to study the impacts on ecosystems.
Wow. It's a lot of moving parts.
It is. And then economists to model the costs to society. It's not something any one discipline can solve on its own.
Yeah, it's way too big.
Exactly. It needs all those pieces of the puzzle.
You need all the experts.
Right. And global collaboration lets researchers bring all those pieces together from all over the world.
So we're not just solving problems better.
Right.
We're able to tackle bigger problems, more complex ones.
Exactly. And beyond just problem solving, this approach can actually challenge some of those old assumptions in certain fields.
Okay, interesting.
It can even lead to brand new fields of study emerging, right at those intersections.
So globalization isn't just about spreading existing knowledge.
Right.
It's about creating entirely new knowledge.
Exactly. It's like a catalyst for all sorts of new discoveries.
Wow, that's pretty amazing.
It is. And there's another really important part of all this that we need to talk about. The rise of what we call open science.
Oh, yeah, open science. I've been hearing a lot about that lately.
Yeah, it's a big deal. It's all about, making scientific research and data more accessible.
So not keeping it all locked up in, private journals or labs.
Exactly. It's about sharing it with the world.
So why is this becoming so important, in the context of globalization?
Well, for one thing, it helps researchers from all over the world to build upon each other's work.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Imagine if, say, a team in South America could just, instantly access and analyze data that was collected by a team in Europe.
They wouldn't have to start from scratch.
Exactly. It would
Yeah.
speed up the pace of research so much.
It's like creating a global knowledge commons,
Yeah.
where everyone can contribute their piece and everyone benefits.
That's a perfect way to put it. It really captures that spirit of scientific inquiry.
Right, it's about sharing those discoveries, pushing the boundaries of knowledge together.
Exactly.
But I imagine there are challenges to making that work, right?
Right. Of course, there are always challenges.
Especially on a global scale.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, how do you protect intellectual property?
Right.
And how do you make sure that data is kept private when it needs to be?
Those are important questions, for sure. But the potential benefits of open science, they're just enormous.
Okay.
Imagine a world where scientists can easily collaborate, share their findings openly, and build on each other's work to tackle those huge challenges facing humanity.
Those big global problems.
Exactly. That's the real promise of open science.
It's inspiring, isn't it?
It is. It really speaks to, what this whole deep dive has been about.
Yeah.
We've seen how the globalization of science is creating these incredible new opportunities, new challenges, but ultimately a new way of understanding the world.
It's changing how we think about science.
It really is. And I think, for everyone listening, the key takeaway here is we're living through a massive transformation in science right now.
It's a really exciting time.
It is. Knowledge is becoming more global, it's more interconnected, and it's more accessible than ever before.
It's like we're witnessing the birth of, I don't know, a global scientific ecosystem.
And it's full of possibilities.
Full of possibilities. So stay curious, embrace collaboration, and never underestimate the power of, just one individual to make a difference.
Well said. Those individual contributions, they all add up to something truly remarkable.
They do. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the globalization of science. We hope you've enjoyed the journey, learned some new things along the way, and maybe even, feel a little bit inspired.
Absolutely. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and stay engaged with this incredible world of global science.
Until next time, happy exploring.